Ishwarama's resplendent sun. It's the start of a bright new day. Time to rise, time to shine, Lord divine. Time to lead us along life's way. Awake, Lord of Buddha party. Awake, O Lord, over all mankind. Awake, O Lord of compassion, that the world good fortune may find. On Chitravati's peaceful shore stands our heart's own mansion. We yearn to serve you, and we long for your holy darshan. Morning's begun, and o'er the world spreads the radiant sun. Sri Sat.
Yesterday I was telling, I started a story and said I would continue today, so I guess I'm obliged to fill you in. When I met Swami in 1970, June 1970, I arrived in Whitefield, and it was a culmination of a pilgrimage that I set out on from that time in Almora the year before. And I went all around India, and I was visiting different teachers and different ashrams and finding disappointments. But all the time I was traveling, I was hearing about Sai Baba, and mainly about his miracles. And I really wanted some teacher that could give me spiritual knowledge and wisdom, so I wasn't really attracted to these miracles. But when I met Swami, that changed everything. And those of you that have read my book, Good Chances, know most of the stories that cover that period when I first arrived through that first year up until Christmas of 1971. And I want to jump ahead because I've written all those stories down for everybody to read. I want to jump ahead because a lot of things have happened since 1971, Christmas. And some of you may or may not know, but I was involved in this planetarium project at the university there at the Sri Satyasai Institute of Higher Learning. And the story is a long story, and it's a involved story. And I thought I would tell you that story because it includes a lot of wonderful experiences and a lot of miracles of Swami. But first, several people have asked me, if I've ever been married. And so I thought I'd tell you that 5 times in my life, Swami has told me not to get married. And that was in 1971, and 1977, 1978, 79, and 86. So, and part of the story I'm going to tell is that I almost did get married once. But in 1971, he called me in, and this was in Madras, or Christmas time, the day that Walter Cohen died, and he told me not to get married and to lead a free, unattached life. And in 1977, I was back there for a 1-month visit, and we had a number of interviews. Plus, there was a wedding he performed of Richard and Michelle Kaplowitz and Marcia and Wesley Huffman. It was a double wedding. And then after the wedding was over, when we were leaving, he called us to the bungalow in Whitefield, and I asked him, Swami, what about my marriage, all my friends, and he said, no, don't do marriage. He said, you're not young, you're middle-aged. Now, the two couples that he had just married were older than me. And Swami has his ways of really teasing you. Now, there was a circle of, sort of a semicircle of ladies standing. Say, Swami was in the middle, and the semicircle of ladies was standing there, and I was standing there. So I wanted to ask him, well, if I can't get married, what should I do about the natural urges and desires that one has? So he was talking to all these ladies and calling them in one by one separately to the room. And you could see him inside the room talking to these women, whispering and very quietly, very privately. So when it came my turn and I wanted to ask Swami this very important question, he comes out. Well, I should backtrack. In that winter, I was seeing this lady that I met at the Psi Center in Manhattan. And that was the winter of '77. And I was confused because Swami had previously, in 1971, told me not to get married. But I figured, well, this is 1977, so it's a long time. And so we were seeing each other, and it wasn't really working that well. And I would be in my bedroom up in Pound Ridge, New York, about 50 miles north of New York City in the woods, and praying to Swami, should I get married? Should I not get married? What should I do? And also, I had a lot of allergies back east, and it's one of the reasons I moved out west. And I was wheezing early in the morning. And in the interview, Swami said to me, he said, you sat in your little room there in New York, and you used to pray to Swami every morning, should I get married? Should I not get married? And you'd be coughing like this. So he knows everything. I mean, he was able to say what I prayed for 10,000 miles away 6 months before in a little cottage in the woods. So he's standing there, and I think, well, now it's my turn, and he's going to take me in the room. So he comes out of the room with a bag of a booty, shaking his finger at me, and he says, where is your wife? Where is your wife? And I said, Swami, I don't have a wife. And he said, well, what about that girl? Tell. And I said, well, that relationship only lasted about 2 months. And he said, yes, yes, I know. He said, this is not good. I don't like it. And then I said, then he went and he handed out the booty to everybody. And I'm dying to ask him this question. Well, I mean, I want to know, did he expect me to be celibate or brahmachari, or what I should do about lust and things like that? I'm really dying to ask him this question. So he comes back, and I said, Swami, and he goes, what? And the ladies, all these ladies are standing right there, and I said, Swami, and he moves closer to the ladies, and he says, what? Like that. So I'm trying to get up the courage to say, Swami, what about lust, And he says, that time, think of Swamiji, is what he said. And then he turned and he walked inside. As he was going inside, he stopped. He threw his hand up in the air like this, and he said, lust, lust, lust. And he laughed hysterically and went inside. So there I was, totally embarrassed and humiliated. And so went back to the States. And then he had said to me in that interview to come next year for summer course. And I thought that was kind of odd, because now my boss in New York was also a Sai Baba devotee. I was always lucky to work for devotees because I'd meet them at the meetings and offer me a job or something. So he said, come back next year for summer course. And I knew that would involve about 6 weeks of vacation, because summer course was a month long, and then you need a week to get there and get over your jet lag, and then at least a couple of weeks after summer course to chase Swami around and ask him for an interview. So I was thinking, how am I going to arrange this? And well, the way it worked out is I was getting more. I had a lot of allergies in New York, and they were getting worse, and I was really not happy with this job, and feeling that I wanted to move to California and go back to San Francisco, where I had lived in the late 60s. And I just felt like, well, I would quit my job before I go to summer course, and asked Swami for new direction in a career because I had my mind made up. I was going back to California and I was going to pursue something that were more along the lines of my college education. So when I got to summer course, everything was wonderful. The summer course was fantastic, but Swami was ignoring me. He wasn't, being friendly, and he wasn't. I mean, I would be sitting in a row of people, and there'd be like Mr. Bazzani would be here, and I'd be sitting there, and he would sort of talk to everybody and be standing close, but he just wouldn't acknowledge me at all. And so after the summer course, we went up to Puda Party, and I was really getting anxious because here I had made this major decision to quit my job and move to California, and I really wanted Swami's blessings and some guidance. And one day he finally walked by in the darshan line, and I got up on my knees and I said, "Swami, I want to talk to you about my career." I was still at the stage where I wanted something from Baba. And he said, yes, I will see you. And then that afternoon, I was in the canteen having lunch, and I noticed this man, young man from America, I guessed he was from America, and he had really bulgy white eyes. I mean, I guess he had a thyroid condition or something. And he had a beautiful gold ring that looked like Swami had made him, and I was really curious about this gold ring because it really attracted. So I went up to him and I said, "Can I see your ring? Did Swami make that for you?" And he said, "Yes." And it was very beautiful, and his name was Jesse, and he was from California and all that. So in the evening, I was sitting in the prayer hall for bhajan towards the back of the door where the men come in, and Swami came out, and he walked down the veranda, and he called me out of the prayer hall, and he said, "Where is that man with the big white eyes?" And I said, "Swami, well, I guess he's here on the darshan." He said, "No, he didn't come to darshan today. I was looking for him." And I said, "Well, I think he's staying in West Prashanti somewhere. Should I go and look for him?" He said, No. He said, "Bring him tomorrow." And then he walked a few steps, and he turned around, and he said, "Is he from New York or California?" And I said, "Swami, he's from California." He said, Yes. "Bring him tomorrow morning." And then he walked in, and I sat down. I went back, and I sat down. He walked into his entrance to the prayer hall. He came down the aisle, and he came up to me, and he said, "I made him that big gold ring." So a little, Swami knows everything. He knows who you talk to in the canteen and who you're looking at and what you're doing. It's amazing. So that night, very late that night, I was up in my room in West Prashanti. There weren't any round buildings yet. And I get a message from the accommodations office that Swami's calling a group for interview at 8:30 in the morning, and I should go and find all these people. And I was given a list of names, but my name wasn't on the group. And neither was Jesse's name, but Swami had said, "Bring him tomorrow morning." And so I went and I found all these people. It was about 9:30 at night, and told them that Swami's calling them. And then I thought in the morning, well, I'll just bring Jesse and we'll just go up to the veranda with the rest of these people and take our chances. And then Swami called everybody in, including us, one by one, and teased Jesse about different things. And then finally, when it was my turn, and he said, "You rowdy, come on." And we went behind the curtain, and he was talking about, family things, and he said that in my family there was my parents had never quite seen the light with Baba, and it's always been a conflict, of interest there. And he said to me, he says, "In your house there's too much fighting." And I thought, my house, in India when they say that they mean your family. And Swami said, "See, your parents have no devotion to God." And he said, "You're following this path of devotion." He said, "They think you're a madman coming here." And then he held my hands. He said, "But this is good madness." And it was a very sweet thing for him to say. And but I wanted to ask him this question about my career. And I said, "Swami, I want to move to California." And he said, "Why move?" He said, "Native place is best." And I said, "But Swami, I'm not happy with my work, and I want a job that uses my brains and my talent." Now, this is 1978, just to backtrack. And he said, "What do you really want to do?" Well, naturally, spontaneously, it came out of my heart. I said, "Swami, I want to stay here and work for you." Because truthfully, that was what I really wanted to do, and moving to California was the second choice, because I didn't think that it would be possible to stay in India and work for Swami. But he said, oh yes, he said, I'm building a planetarium. And he said, you go and get planetarium training. And I was just totally stunned, you know, because I mean, when I was like in grade school, they took us to the Hayden Planetarium in New York, and I mean, that was about as much as I'd ever thought about planetariums or planetarium training or anything. And he said, you go and get planetarium training. And he said, you come back next year, he said, and I'm building a big planetarium. And he went into this description of this enormous planetarium that he was going to build. And I was just reeling, and I was saying, planetarium training, Swami? He said, yes, yes, planetarium training. He said, work 6 more months in New York, next get the training, and come back here. He said, I will arrange everything. And then as I was leaving, he said, and there's a planetarium in California, he said. So I came out of this interview totally shocked. I mean, totally turned around, because here I was working working for Harry Patterson in New York. He had one of these interior design showrooms and that sells furniture, carpets, and things to architects and designers. And I wanted to pursue this line of career and go out to California. And so I was totally turned around. So I went back to New York, and Harry Patterson was willing to, being a devotee, was willing to give me my job back for 6 months. And the person who rented my cottage up in Pound Ridge, New York, said, "Oh, well, you can have this back." And he was also a devotee. You know, everything in those days was all through devotees. And so I got my job back and my cottage back. And then John Gilbert, the late John Gilbert, who died in Puttaparthi some years ago, called me and he said, "There's a planetarium conference in Washington, D.C. Let's go down and check it out." So we went down there, and of course there was a table in the back, and it had brochures, and it had all the universities that offer courses in planetarium, you know, how to run a planetarium, how to put on a planetarium show. But there was only one school that had planetarium training, and it was called planetarium training, and you didn't need a Bachelor of Science degree to get into the course, and that was San Francisco State University. And Swami had said there's a planetarium in California. So I wrote to the people. I met the people from the state. There was a lady named Vicki Lindsay, a very attractive young lady who was a professor of physics and astronomy there. I met her, and she said she would talk to Professor Hager, who was head of the department, and I could take the training and probably just audit the whole thing and not have to worry. So I stayed in New York 6 months, took some courses at the Hayden Planetarium, and then went out to San Francisco and started this course in planetarium training. And Vicki was really wonderful, and there were some other people, and everybody was really nice to me. And as I was leaving for India at the end of this course, and it was about June of '79, thinking that I'd completed the 6-month training, and now Swami said come back, and he would arrange everything. And I was growing very fond of Vicki, and she was growing fond of me, but I didn't think that it would be anything possible to, you know, start up any kind of relationship or anything, because I was going to India, and I was going to stay in India the rest of my life. So we said goodbye, and I was off to India, and I got to India, and Swami just completely ignored me. Not only did he completely ignore me, nobody knew anything about this planetarium. Apparently the project had been shelved completely. And I finally, when Dr. Bhagwantam showed up and Colonel Jogarao, I asked them, and they said, yeah, it seems Swami has put the project on the shelf. And so there I was stewing. I mean, I was really, I figured now I'd been a devotee 9 years, and I'd really, you know, made so much effort, and my ego was coming up, and I was thinking, now I've done all this sadhana and meditation and given up all this worldly life, and I've done this and that, you know, and the ego was just boiling over with all these things that I had done, and how could he do this to me? And I was stewing and stewing and stewing. And so, and I found myself, here it was 1979, I found myself sitting on the darshan line with no home and no job, and not knowing which direction I should go, and totally, you know, feeling deserted and kicked in the pants by Swami. And so I wrote him this letter, and I said, Swami, in this letter I said, all my friends, all the contemporaries that I had gone to India with and been in India with in 1970, 71, 72, I said, they're all married and they have children and they have homes and careers, and I'm sitting here. And I gave him this letter among the many thousands of letters that he gets on a daily or weekly basis, and it just went into the, sort of just went into the pile, and that was the last of it. And another few weeks went by, and so by the time I got settled down and started to get calm and started to surrender and started to feel that this is Swami's will and there's some good in this for me and feel some peace within me, it was about 11 weeks had gone by. And about 3 or 4 weeks since I had given him this letter. And I'm sitting there finally one day in calm serenity on the darshan line, and Swami walks up to me out of the blue and he says, there's no planetarium. He said, go back to any work there. And he walked away. Well, I was just totally stunned, I was just thinking, oh my God, I was just so shocked that tears were streaming down my face, and I thought Swami was the cruelest person that I'd ever met, at that point. So then I was just sitting there. I came for bhajans that afternoon, and I was sitting in the middle of the prayer hall, and I was just crying, and he was sitting in his chair, and he was, looking at me with a lot of compassion. And in the evening, he walked out, and it was an interesting darshan because all he did was walk around close to that lotus circle. And when he came past where I was sitting, he pointed at me and said, I'll see you tomorrow. And he went inside. And that was the entire darshan that evening. And so the next morning, I was sitting there, and he said, Americans come. And he called me and some other Americans. And I went in the interview room for the first time ever, not really thrilled to be there. I was not happy. I was very sad. I was disappointed, dejected, and my ego was just struggling with all this. And he sat there and he said, see, he said, there's no planetarium. What can I do? He said, they ordered that small planetarium that, from Chicago, from that man. What was his name? And I said, Swami, I don't know. And he thought, he said, Rush. He said, he says, Goldstein told me I was going to get a big planetarium. And he said, small boys look through little windows. What use is that? And they had this little observatory thing that was made of plastic, and it had these windows, and you could look in and see the solar system. And they had set that up in the library at Whitefield so that the students could get encouraged, And he said, small boys look through little windows. What use is? He says, oh, plastic. Everything from America is plastic. And he said, I spent 15 lakhs of rupees on this plastic. He said, what can I do? There's no funds, So he's making an excuse. Here's God making an excuse to me and blaming it on Dr. Goldstein. It's funny now, it is funny, and I laugh a lot about it. But in those days, at the moment, I wasn't too happy about it all. So he said to me, what is your work there? And I said, Swami, I work for Mr. Patterson in New York. And he said, did you go to school? And I said, yes, I studied architecture. I said, but that was like 11 years ago. So he thought for a minute, and he said, then do engineering and construction. He said, work 5 years. Next, come back. I'll have some work for you here. That was in the group. Then he called me in privately, and he said, anger, ego, jealousy. He says, no faith in Swamiji. He just went on lambasting me like this, And then, and he says, and you think of your friends. Now remember, I wrote him a letter nearly a month before. The letter went into the pile of thousands of letters. So if you think Swami doesn't know what's in your letters, he said, you think of your friends, and they're married, and they have children, and, he's going on, just chiding me. And he said, ants get married and have children. He said, even worms. He said, even worms have children. What's the specialty? He said, lead free, unattached life. He said, don't do marriage. He said, but then he said, do you want marriage? And after he had said all that, it was hard to, it was very difficult to say, yeah, I want marriage. So I said, well, I guess not, Swami. And he said, good boy, I will bless. And he blessed me, and so there I was off, back to America, and thinking engineering and construction. You know? So I went back to San Francisco and moved into the Psi Center there. Don Heath had some rooms, and started looking for work. And I went on many, many job interviews with my kind of discombobulated resume with big gaps in it, you know, from when I went to India. And ended up getting a job for a company in the architecture and interior design department. And this company turned out to be the largest engineering and construction company in the world, based in San Francisco. And so I ended up working there exactly 5 years. And then the company, you know, when this oil crunch hit Texas, I think it was '84, they had a lot of things in building oil rigs and oil wells and things. So they started falling on harder times and started laying off people, and everybody in my division was getting laid off. And then I felt my time was coming. And I woke up one morning in September of 1984, popped out of bed, and I just had this sense that the karma for this job was over. And Swami had said 5 years. And from that day on, I never had any work again in the office. And I stayed on about over 2 months. And there was no work at all. Absolutely nothing. I just sat there 8 hours a day reading magazines and waiting for the axe to fall. And then finally I just realized, well, when Swami says 5 years, he means 5 years. So I resigned, and I decided I would sell everything, you know, that I had in San Francisco. I was renting a house and pack up everything, and I would go to India because Swami said work 5 years and come back. And I thought, well, who knows what he's going to say this time, but I'll go and I'll see, and just to have his darshan. And I don't want anything, you know. I don't want to ask him anything about my career. Just be happy, sit there, you know. I still loved Swami somehow and all of this. Boy, I left out a major part of this story. You see, it's early morning and I haven't had coffee yet. Well, let's backtrack because I've gone all the way up to 1984. When I came back in 1979, when Swami said no planetarium, and I had begun to look, I was going to look for this job, I decided I wasn't going to contact Vicky. That was the lady who was teaching physics and astronomy at San Francisco State. Because Swami had said, no, you know, why marry, ants and worms get married and all that kind of thing. And so I said, I'm not gonna get in touch with her because it wouldn't be a good thing to start up a relationship. And I had felt something brewing there before I left. So one of my friends, one of the devotees who lived up in Marin County one day, called me and he said, let me take you to lunch at Green's restaurant in Fort Mason. It was a famous vegetarian restaurant. So on the way in the car, he said to me, are you going to call Vicky? And I said, no, I'm not going to call Vicky because I don't want to get involved. We go into Green's restaurant, we're sitting down, having lunch, and all of a sudden I hear this lady yell out, Howard. Right at the very next table, behind in the next booth, Vicky is sitting there with her friend talking about me and wondering how I was doing in India, and then there I am. So it was inevitable, it was destined, and we ended up being in a relationship. And then she had to go off to China. She was invited to China to teach physics and astronomy for 8 months. And so I asked her if she would stop in India on the way and see Swami and ask Swami if we should get married, because I was really into this thing. As I totally, you know, I stand here in front of all these strange people and bare my personal life. But anyway, I said, go and ask Swami. And so she was sitting on the darshan line, and she had this letter, and she had my picture. And Swami just wouldn't take it. He'd smile at her. And then one evening, he came out of the prayer hall, and he came right up to her on the lady's side, and he took the envelope, he opened it up, he saw my picture, threw it back at her, you know, kind of in disgust, and walked away. Maybe it wasn't a very good picture, I don't know. And so she wrote this to me, and she felt that Swami definitely did not want us to get married, and there was a definite discouragement. And she wrote this to me, and then I was a little upset, but I figured, well, I'll talk to her when she gets back from China. I'll talk to her, and I'll convince her that it's okay, and you know, Swami does these things, and you can't listen to everything he says. And I had it all rationalized. So she came back from China, and she went through a lot of her own personal growth and changes in China. And when she came back, she decided that she definitely did not want to get married, and that she wanted to pursue her career and go into astrophysics and get her doctorate and all that. And when she told me this, you know, and it was really final, and it was really, I knew it was Swami, and I was really mad at Swami, and I was just, because I had really waited 8 months for this lady to come back from her trip. And I had psyched myself up to the point that we were going to get married. You know, you make plans in your mind, and when the rug is pulled out, you get very upset. And I was lying in bed, and I was really, really mad at Swami, and I was looking at his picture, and I was saying, Swami, you just made me so miserable, and I was recalling the planetarium incident the year before, how he had told me to get the training, and all these things building up, and I was just feeling like I didn't know if I loved him or I hated him. I didn't know what I felt. And I was lying there, and I couldn't fall asleep, and finally, dozing off in the night, I had these bamboo blinds on the window, and the street light would come through, so there was sort of a semi-light, semi-darkness, and I heard 2 explosions in my head. And when I looked up, there was no pain. There was Swami floating above my bed, and from the waist up, he was very clear and very visible, and from the waist down, it was like he sort of faded into the darkness. And I reached up like this, and he reached down. We held hands, and I could feel his hand warm and just like holding. And I said, Swami, is that you? And he said, yes, yes. He said, don't worry, I'm always with you. And then he just disappeared. So he came to me in my most painful hour. Because, you know, for Swami, these are very important things in your life. Your marriage, your career, your upanayam, when you get your sacred thread. These are the things that are important in a human being's life. And so, since this was such an important thing to me, Swami appeared to me in my room in San Francisco and consoled me like that. And it was just wonderful. And then I went to the World Conference in 1980. You know, I got leave from my job for 3 weeks and went, and it was really a wonderful experience. And a little story of surrender. When we were going down to the Purnachandra, and the crowds were swelling, and it was so big, and the gates were down, and I was with another friend from New York, and I said, Mark, I don't know how we're going to get in there. I said, but just hang on to me, and don't worry. And we were outside the gate, and the crowd was pushing and pushing and pushing, and I said, well, I just said to myself, Swami, I'm just going to surrender to you, and you'll put me exactly where I'm supposed to be, because I was really getting afraid that I was going to be crushed to death there. And all of a sudden, a volunteer came and said, Mr. Howard, and he took me by the arm, and he led me right up to the veranda of the mandir and sat me down. And Swami came out, and I got to wish him happy birthday and touch his feet. So when you just surrender, you know, in your moment of fear, he'll take you and he'll put you where you're supposed to be. And so back to December of '84, sitting in my house in San Francisco, this job that I had gone through, was over. Everything was sold. I was sitting on boxes. All that incident with Vicky and the vision all had taken place 4 years before. And I'm just going to go back to Baba peacefully, and the phone rings, and it's Michelle Kaplowitz, and she said, are you sitting down? And I said, well, I have no furniture, but I'm sitting down. And she said, Swami's building the planetarium. And they're looking for somebody to be a consultant, and your name came up, and you should call Dr. Goldstein. So I called Dr. Goldstein, and he came. He said that Swami wanted him to look at a Spitz 512 planetarium system, and I said, well, that was a funny coincidence, because I had trained on the Spitz 512 at San Francisco State, and I said, let me arrange a little tour for you. I hadn't seen any of those people now in 4 years, and I called, and they said, sure, you can come and bring Dr. Goldstein. And so as events moved on, he saw the Spitz 512, and he went to India, reported to Baba and to Indulal Shah, and also took a letter from me and a letter from Professor Hager saying I had taken the training to Indulal Shah, and he talked to Swami. And then I went to India because my 5 years were up and it was time to go. So I'm sitting on the darshan line, and I was with a group from Elsie Cowan's center. And one day Swami called Elsie Cowan's group. She wasn't there, but she had sent us all with a letter. And he called Elsie Cowan's group. And when I came up to the veranda with the rest of the people, he came up to me and he said, "No, you go back. I'll see you, talk to you later." So that's always disappointing, but I figured he has his reasons. And so I'm sitting there in the darshan line, and then he came up to me one day and he said, "Planetarium training?" And I said, "Yes, Swami." He said, yes, I will see, I will see. And nothing happened. And I was getting really frustrated, and weeks were going by. And here I was. I thought I was going to go to India peaceful and not want anything, but he stirred it all up again. And so this planetarium issue came up again, and I was very agitated. And finally, Dr. Goldstein and Indula Shah showed up to sign the contract to purchase the planetarium equipment. And they went in Swami's car, and apparently there was some discussion about me, and Swami said I could work in the planetarium as a consultant on a trial basis to see how I could acclimatize and adjust to India. And he reminded Dr. Goldstein and Indula Shah that I was a rowdy and that I should adjust to the discipline there. See, you always think, I always thought of myself as so disciplined. And so when you think of yourself as disciplined, Swami says you're a rowdy. And when you think of yourself as a rowdy, Swami says, "Oh no, good, bungaroo." So when I was told this news after the drive, Dr. Goldstein summoned me and told me that Swami had okayed it. And they said to me, "Have you been behaving yourself?" I said, "As far as I know." So it was funny, though, how the mind works. I decided at that point that I should leave, and that if and when this planetarium is built, I'll come back. It was simple. I said, there's no point in waiting, because right now there's just a big plot of sand, where Swami had dedicated the site. And there was no point in sitting in India months and months and months waiting for this thing to be constructed and struggling for visas when I could go back to America and work and earn some more money. And then if they're actually going to build the thing, like they said, like Swami had told me in 1978, and now we're up to 1985, I said, then I'll go. And so everybody was kind of surprised. Now, why are you leaving? And I said, well, I gave Swami a letter. He took the letter, touched his feet in the darshan line, and I left. And I went to New York, and I got a job, and I was living in Manhattan and getting this job, and it was just, but I knew, there was like a fire inside my spine, or like my kundalini was on fire. I could feel that this was not where I was supposed to be, and that it wasn't going to last. And so one day I just decided to pack it all in and go out to Montana, to the Feather Pipe Ranch, where I had visited a number of occasions, owned by my friend India Supra. And I thought I'd go visit India and just sit in the forest, in the mountains, and meditate on this whole thing and just decide what course of action I was going to take. And so I went out to Montana, and I had a very, very nice summer in the summer of '85, and I decided that I would just go to India in the fall for Swami's birthday and just sit in the darshan line like anybody else. And if I'm going to be working in this planetarium, Swami will call me and say, you go work in the planetarium, and well, what happened was I got a phone call around late August of '85 at the ranch saying that, Swami, they want you there for birthday to be the consultant. And everything's going to be arranged, and you'll have a room, and you'll have all this, and just get your visa and get over to India at least 2 weeks before the birthday. And the planetarium was actually under construction. That's what I said. Well, I said to Dr. Goldstein on the phone, I said, well, is it really being built? He said, yeah, it's really being built. And he sent me some photos of the under construction phase. So I went there for the birthday, and I got there for 2 weeks, and it was under construction, but it looked like there was no way possible it could be ready for the 60th birthday, and this was 1985. I mean, it was so behind schedule, but all the devotees worked day in, day out. Of course, when I arrived in the accommodations office in Prasanthi Lane, nobody knew about me or a room that was supposed to be there, but I went to Mr. Kutumarao, and he said, well, I believe you. He said, I've known you all these years. He said, I believe you, and he gave me a nice room, and it was getting very crowded. And it was a real miracle to see the devotees work so hard, and all the students and everybody volunteering. But we got the thing to the point where, with hanging black velvet cloth over the entryways and draping it over some of the gaps in the ceiling in the hall, we could block out all the light and turn on the planetarium and at least have a show for Swami's birthday. So that point came, and it was, I think, the day, either the day before, now my memory doesn't serve me well on this, but it was either the 22nd or the 24th, we had a show, an opening inaugural show. And I was up on the console with this man, Dr. Reed from Spitz Laboratories in Pennsylvania, and Swami came up, and our idea was that Swami would push the button. There's a little lever, and you hold it up, and this planetarium projector would come up and show the stars, and we'd play the music from 2001 Space Odyssey, and it'd be very dramatic. And so Swami came up to the console, and I'm standing to his left, and Dr. Reed to his right. And Swami is, Swami's only 5'3", and this console's this big, long thing, and it's slanted like this, and he can barely see over the top, and all these buttons and all these dials, and it's all automated. Dr. Reed said, "Swami, we want you to inaugurate the planetarium." And Swami said, "Where?" He's looking at He was just like this innocent little village person who didn't know all this technology. He said, "Where?" And he showed him the button, and Swami pushed it down. So I whispered, "No, Swami, you have to hold it up." So he held up the button, and we played the music, and this big star projector, $1 million worth of equipment came up, and it was really dramatic. And then Dr. Reed said, "Swami, can you see the star projector?" And Swami said, "I can't see, I'm very short." He couldn't see over the top of the console to see the star projector coming up. And it was great. And then everybody laughed in the hall because the microphones were on. And then he went and he sat down in his chair, and we had this show, and then everybody clapped. And when he got up to leave, he got up from his chair, and he came up to the console, and he started walking this way. Well, the aisle and the curvature of the wall sort of come together, and he's going into a dead end. So this was just obviously a chance for me. And I said, "Swami, you can't go out that way." And he turned to me and he says, "Oh, why?" And I said, "Because the wall is..." "Oh, okay." And he let me take his hand and lead him all the way down behind the console and down, holding his hand. And I was just in total ecstasy, from that. And the amazing thing was there were 800,000 people out there to see him for his birthday. And here was this what seemed like just a person, but at one moment he's a person and at one moment he's God. It's totally incomprehensible. So innocent, so sweet, so childlike, and yet so powerful and commanding. And so then I was there, and then the planetarium shut down again, and they had a couple of weeks worth of construction to finish up. I mean, in the States it would have taken about a couple of weeks, but it dragged on for 5 months in India. Things move a little slower there. But what happened was we went back to Whitefield after the birthday, the World Conference, and this was a very wonderful time because I got to be inside and have evening bhajans with Swami. And Christmas time, Swami had some programs for the foreigners, and after the bhajan with the foreigners, we went into the Treyi Brindavan, and we're sitting on the long veranda, and during the bhajans inside with the students, Swami dropped he had his finger cymbals, he dropped and he went stiff for 11 minutes, and we timed it. And he just sat there, motionless. And, your mind thinks, well, where is he, what is he doing? He might be going around the world, he might be doing anything, but it was just, I'd never seen that before, I'd read about it. And that was a very moving experience. And then after Whitefield, we went back to Puttaparthi. And in all this time, Swami hadn't said a whole lot to me, though I got to sort of be right there next to him with the other teachers and students in the college, and just sort of hanging out with the Lord, which is one of my favorite pastimes. But he still hadn't said anything to me. And then he came down he started these weekly visits to the planetarium, and we'd all be sitting around waiting for these tiles to be put in and waiting for this and that. And the first time he came down, he was describing the light fixtures in the lobby, and he looked up at the light fixtures, and long description in Telugu, and then he turned to me and he said, stars. So I got one word, you know. That was it. I got one word, and then the second week he came down and he was looking at the marble finishing on the entryway, and he was long descriptions in Telugu, talking with the engineers and construction people, and then he turned to me and he says, it's not good construction. You know, so I got a couple of words the next time. And then finally, it was getting near for the seats and the tile to be installed. And another time, which was really fun, he came down to the planetarium, and nobody was there but me. For some reason, nobody expected him. And Swami got out of his car, and he walked into the men's bathroom, which was under construction. They had put the pink tile in the men's bathroom and the blue tile in the ladies' bathroom. And Swami wasn't pleased about that. So there I was, standing there in this men's room with Swami, you know, and pink tile, and he was looking at every detail. He was saying, he said, look at this. This pipe is not straight. These tiles are the wrong color. Sinks are too small. And he said, many people will come here. Many foreigners will come here. He said, see how it looks. And then everybody else came running in. But he saw every detail of the construction, and he's like a real trained engineer foreman when he's out on the job site. I mean, it's just amazing that he doesn't miss anything. He knows how everything is supposed to be. He knows what's supposed to be where and how it all fits together. And he's talking to the engineers and telling them this and telling them that, not asking questions, but directing. And then finally this tile came in, and it was blue. And they put this blue tile in the main theater, and the seats were orange. Well, they had originally ordered like a different color, but the wrong color tiles came in. And because of the time factor, they installed blue. So there were blue tiles and orange chairs with these sort of olive green armrests and legs. And Swami walked into the main theater one day, and he looked and he looked and he said, blue. He said, blue is for Mohammedans. He says, yes, blue is for Mohammedans, you know, like, because if you go into all the mosques and everything in the Middle East, it's all blue. Blue is the main color. And then he said, he looked at me and he said, it's not good combination. And he said, tell Rowdy. He looked at me, tell. And I said, yes, Swami. I said, orange seats and green arms and legs and blue tiles, not good combination. He says, yes, it's not good. And then he went over to one of the entryways, which was cast in concrete, and it was a little bit crooked. And he said, this is not straight. And he said to Dr. Prasad, the director of the planetarium, why didn't you tell them? And he said to me, you're also blind. Why didn't you say anything? Well, I backtrack. I was told not to say anything about the construction or anything. You know, one of the organization people gave me advice, just stay, you know, you're just here as a consultant for shows and things. You don't have to make any comments about the construction. So I dare not say anything. And then Swami says to me, why didn't you say anything? So that's always how it is, you know. It's like damned if you do and damned if you don't. Well, what happened was, finally the planetarium got to open in May. But in between time, we went to Whitefield. And I call March of 1986 the month of miracles, because Swami did so many materializations that month. And I want to tell you about some of them and some of the conclusions I drew from seeing them. There's one incident, we were sitting along the driveway with the students, and we would stand. Swami would use the teachers and professors and guests along the driveway as sort of his fall men for jokes, you know, to entertain the students. And one time he had called a group from outside in for an interview, and they were going up the ramp, and he just called to this lady, and he said, Ma, and he waved his hand and materialized a beautiful fresh plum, and he tossed it to her like this, and she caught it. And it wasn't even, you know, you don't even know if plums grow in Bangalore. Where do plums grow? I don't even know, but it was just a wonderful thing. Another time the students had a picture, and they wanted Swami to sign it, and they gave Swami the picture and the pen ran out of ink, and Swami stepped back, and he waved his hand and made this beautiful pen, and it was red with a gold top. And he took it off and he said, see, very nice pen. And he signed and picture. And another time he made some rock candy for some of the boys. And then inside in the evening programs, sometimes he would give a discourse, and Professor Satyadev, some of you may know Professor Satyadev from the ashram, had this ring that Swami had materialized for his wife. And when his wife died, he took the ring off her finger and he tried to put it on his finger, and it was too small. And he prayed to Baba, and the ring expanded and slipped down onto his finger. And that was up in somewhere in New Delhi or something, many years before. So Swami called Satyadev and he said, tell the story. He wanted him to tell the story about the ring. And he says, now I'm going to make you a new ring, a beautiful diamond ring. And he took the ring and he just, like that, and he changed it into a beautiful diamond ring. And he did this for a number of people, changing their rings and materializing things. And I was sitting and talking to Mr. Ratanlal one day on the driveway, and we were having a lot of discussions. I knew Mr. Ratanlal from way back 1970, many, many years, and we've always had a lot of philosophical talks. And so he came out, Swami came out of the Trey Brindavan, and he picked off a little leaf from one of the ice plants. They also grow in California. And he picked off this little leaf from the ice plant, and he was tossing it in his hand, and he came up to Mr. Ratanlal, and he said, what is this? And Mr. Ratanlal said, well, I don't know the botanical name. And he held it, he said, no, this is God. And he went, and he changed it into a Shiva lingam, a small black lingam. Just blew on this leaf with his breath, and instantly. Then when he was giving it to Mr. Ratanlal, he said, oh, he noticed he had a chain around his neck. So he took it back, and he held it the long way, and he went, and he blew a hole down it, and just gave it to him and said, you wear this with you. And another time we had been in Mr. Ratanlal's house, which is behind Swami's, having tea before darshan and talking about Swami. And he came out that afternoon and he called, he said, hey, Ratanlal, come, and you, Rowdy. He said, you two were talking about Swami this afternoon, I know. You know, just a little way that he lets you know everything. So he did all these wonderful miracles. And of course, seeing him take the leaf and blow on it and just instantly turn it into a lingam and then make the hole. I'd seen him do this kind of thing before, but it'd been many years. And so I saw him make this, rings, change rings into metal rings into diamond rings. And two boys did a music performance for him one evening, and he waved his hand and materialized two silver ID bracelets with their names on it. Came right out of his hand. Pens, candy, plum, Shiva lingam. And you realize that he can do anything. There's nothing that Swami can't do. There's nothing that he can't materialize, and that's how God made the universe. He just materialized it. And it's very profound when you look at it that way. And everything he does is with so much love and so much giving and so much joy, and he asks for nothing at all. He doesn't want anything. And at the 60th birthday, I don't know, some of you may have been there, he had all the states from India had given him money for his birthday. And Swami had a big ceremony, and he gave back all the money. And he said, I don't need any money. And he said, I'm the richest man in the world. Now you can interpret that two ways. And nobody in the world can equal my wealth. And you can say, well, Swami says the richest man in the world is the man with the least desires. And then, or he could be physically, you know, the richest man in the world with the most money in his trust. I mean, either way, it's true, because he wants nothing from anybody. And he gave back all that money. And he's never asked, in the 20 years that I've been a devotee, and the 16 years that I got to go back and forth, I haven't been back in 4 years, he's never asked for anything but our hearts and our love and devotion. And he's given us so many times. I mean, in those days, I've known so many incidents where he's given foreigners money to go home, or if they ran out of money or needed money, he would give them money. And think of it as 60th birthday. Hundreds of thousands of people were given free food. He gave away 10,000 saris. I mean, he's always giving, and he's never asking. And well, what happened towards the end, we finally got this planetarium show going, and Swami came, it was about May 31st, he came back from Whitefield, and I had received a notice from the government of India that they would not extend my visa, even though I had a letter inviting me to stay from the university, saying that they would like to have me there as a consultant for at least a year. And I had all these letters and documentation and guarantees and everything you're supposed to need to get a visa. They said they would not extend my visa because I entered on the wrong kind of visa. And so I realized I had to go back to the States. And I was sad about it, but in a way I felt, at this point in time, I felt, well, whatever happens is Swami's will and it's for the best. So I wasn't going through a big turmoil about it in that way, but I was sad that I was going to be leaving Swami. And Swami came down to the planetarium, and he got out of his car. It was a red Mercedes, and it was like the Lord getting out of his chariot. You know, there was something really beautiful about it. And he came up to me and he said, "What about you, sir?" He said, "No permission. You have to go back to your country." And I said, "Swami, will you see me before I go?" And he said, "Yes, yes." And so a few days later, he called me in with a group of people, and they were all people who worked in the university, and some Iranians, and called me in for, and he said, "See," he says, "too much problem with India and America is not good friendship." And he said, "Too much visa problem." He said, "You go back to your country." He said, "Come and stay 6 months here, 6 months there." And I was thinking, and I had mentioned this yesterday, I was sitting there thinking, you know, how am I going to come and go for 6 months? And while he was seeing the other people, he was talking to them about their problems. Then he came and he called me and he said, "You were sitting there thinking how I'll arrange to come and go, don't worry." And then in one of the private, he called me in 3 times and gave me 3 private interviews. In one of the private interviews, he sat down and he looked in my eyes, and he looked at me and he said, 6 years back, now this is 1986, and the incident where he appeared in my room over when Vicky decided, you know, broke up with me and all that, was 1980, August, and this was around June 86. And he said, 6 years back, he said, there was that girl you wanted to marry. And he looked in my eyes. It was like a confirmation of that whole experience. And he said, now, he said, sometimes you think of ladies and marriage. He said, no ladies, no marriage, no more worldly thoughts and desires. You only think of Swamiji. And that was really the last things he said and that was in the 3rd interview. In the 2nd interview, he brought in a man from Peru who spoke English with a very, very heavy Spanish accent. So I acted as the interpreter between Spanish accented English to Telugu accented English. And Swami called this man in with me and he said, "Where are you from?" And the man said, you know, Peru. And Swami said, "What did he say?" And I said, "Swami, he's from Peru." "Oh." And Swami said, "How long is he staying?" So I said, "Swami wants to know." He couldn't understand Swami, and Swami couldn't understand him. It was just a game, you know. Swami speaks the language of the heart. And I said, "How long?" Swami wants to know how long you're staying. And he said, "Yes, yes, I'm staying." And Baba would say, what did he say? You know, it's like leaning over to me. It was just it was really a sweet comedy, you know. And so I acted as an interpreter, and then he sent the man out. So, but after that 3rd interview, when he told me that, and he really said that, you know, he said, "You belong to me and I belong to you." And he said, "No more worldly thoughts and desires. You only think of Swamiji." And then he went out, and instead of ending the interview like he normally does, he sat in his chair and talked for about 40 minutes. And the most moving thing that he said is he gestured out the window and he said, "You see," he said, "many people sit near me here in Puttaparthi." He said, "But are they dear to me?" He said, "The frog sits on the lotus and croaks all day long, but it never drinks the sweet nectar of the lotus flower." And he said, "But the bee flies in from far away, and it comes and it drinks the sweet nectar from the lotus flower and it flies off." And he said, "Only dear is important, not near." And he looked at all of us and he said, "Be like the bee, not like the frog." He said, "It's only heart to heart that matters." And he looked out the window and he gestured. He said, "But all are my children." He said, "For me, all are dear." And then he dismissed us, let us touch his feet, gave us the vibhuti, and we went out. And that was that 4 years ago. So in a way, I feel my journey with Swami over the past 16 years is very complete. Because I think I went to India and I dived into an ocean which is bottomless. I mean, India is so vast and there's so much philosophy and there's so much culture and there's so much wisdom there. But I think I was very, very lucky by as Swami said, punya, and good deeds from a previous life, and I was able to meet Swami, to dive deeply into the philosophy and to get the real treasure, the real pearl out of this ocean, and to be close to Baba, to benefit and to receive his teachings. And in a way, I think on a certain level, my life has already peaked, because nothing I've ever done, or no situation that I'm in now, or any place I've ever traveled to, and I've been all over the world, has ever compared to those moments when you're with Swami and he's holding your hand, or he's blessing you, or you're touching his foot. And there's nothing in the world I would trade for just, 1 minute with Swami. There's nothing that's worth it to me. I feel very blessed and very lucky, and I feel when he said to me, no more worldly thoughts and desires, that's the goal that I have to achieve. He has set that goal. Those were his instructions to me. No marriage, no ladies, no more worldly thoughts and desires. You only think of Swamiji. That's what he said. And it doesn't only apply to me, it applies to all of us. This is the goal that we want to reach in our lives. Whatever our situation is, whether we're married and have a family, a big career, or we're just living a simple life like I live, to only think of Swamiji, to clear our minds of all the doubts, all the attachments, all the anxiety, all the fear, and to fix our mind on the lotus feet of this beautiful Lord that has incarnated once again and will come again for the fortunate generations in the future. But to think of him and to live our lives that way, that is the goal for all of us. Because he said it to me, it doesn't mean that suddenly I can just give up everything, all my thoughts and all my desires, but it's something to work towards. And that's the thing. Swami once said that Americans are like puppy dogs. We lap up mother's milk so fast we get indigestion. He said, start early, drive slowly, reach safely. Swami sets these high ideals and these goals for us. Let's work towards them sensibly, safely. Let's not get hysterical. Let's not all run out and shave our heads and put on orange robes and start chanting in the airports. I mean, this is not Swami's way. It's a sane way. It's a slow and steady wins the race. And so he's set this goal for me, and I don't know what else he could possibly say to me after saying something like that. And I haven't been back in 4 years. People say, do you want to go back? And of course, I always want to go back, but then again, it doesn't matter, because Swami's with me. He comes to me in my dreams. His presence is there. He's ingrained himself so much in my consciousness through all these experiences. And if you read Good Chances, you'll see there was a lot of things in the early days, much more than later on, that even if I don't make any effort at all, he comes into my mind every day. And I remember him, and I remember these incidences. And luckily, in my life, I've always ended up having a chance to talk to Swami, about Swami, whether it's to a group or to an individual. Recently, I was in, just finish up, I was in Kenya last winter. I'd always wanted to go to Africa and go on a safari. And I met this man from New Zealand, young man, and he left London and somebody gave him a Sai Baba book. And he read that as he traveled. He put the book down, and the very next day he meets me in Kenya. And that's the way Swami works. And I told him a lot of things, and he ended up going there and having his interview and back to New Zealand, and he wrote me a wonderful letter. So Swami's always there, and he's always following you around wherever you go, and it's been my experiences. I could go on with lots of stories about being in Mexico City and not being able to find the Sai Center. And I get into a taxi cab, and this Mexican man turns around to me. I mean, there's thousands and hundreds of thousands of taxis in Mexico City, and he says, my wife is an Indian from India. If you need any information, you can call her. Just like that, in Mexico City, in a taxi cab. So I called her, and, oh yes, I know where the Sai Baba Center is, no problem. And I found it. So Swami's always there. He's always watching over us, and he's certainly present today. And I want to thank you all for inviting me to speak and allowing me to share my personal story with you. And I hope that I can meet you all again someday. Sairam. Whoops.
started off with two wonderful talks by our two wonderful speakers, and the main focus here, as all of us should remember, is that Swami always comes through to us and comes through for us and is always with us when we most need him. And all we have to do is really take that one step. We'll have a short break before we come back for a panel discussion, and you have the opportunity to ask any questions of our guests. Sayonara.